The broadcast is live.
There we go. So there's a band that had a song come out in the early 2000s, Monster Magnet, and I about flipped out. I think the song was called Melt, and in that line, in the song he had a line that said, "I remember the day the world should have cried, the day that Jack Kirby died," and I about flipped out. I'm like, anybody else hear that? Right? So the world didn't cry when Kirby died. Neil Adams, you guys, what was it, 10 days ago? Is that what you guys decided?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
I don't think the world cried then, even though it should have.
He got a blurb on, he got a little piece on CNN website though.
Yeah. Well, what I'm getting at is like today, where I'm at, last night it started raining horribly. They got hailstorm damage in one town. Like it put holes in the siding of a house and all this stuff. And then it's been raining all day and there's been lightning and stuff. And I think the world did cry for George Perez. I don't care how dramatic I sound, but it happened. It finally happened. So it's raining somewhere. But yeah, George Perez has passed away. I think out of the three of us, I'm the one being the biggest baby about it. And I didn't even, I met the guy one time, got some stuff signed, spent about 10 minutes talking to him years ago. And I've been preparing myself.
Yeah, well, they announced, it was just a couple of months ago, they announced he was on his way out because of pancreatic cancer, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my wife is a nurse, and we were driving, and it was one of the few times that she was the one driving. And it came up on the Facebook. I was actually driving and scrolling, and on Facebook is where I found out when they first announced it. And my wife is an LPN. So she immediately, not cold. I mean, I know nurses come off cold, but she went clinical. And before realizing that I might be a little sensitive to it, I got to hear how horrible it is and how he's not going to last long. Right. Bam, right there, instantly. I mean, and so I've even said it, warning people that I know this sounds nuts and everything, but I'm preparing myself. And I'm in the stage of anger now in that morning. I feel ridiculous. I'm not family. I'm not a friend. But I followed it on his Facebook page, his hospice, him going home, and then they announced it around noon today on his Facebook page is where I found it. I sent it to you guys. So
right,
yeah. So I don't know.
I had to stop looking at Facebook and Twitter today because there were just so many. I just couldn't take looking at any more pictures or any more goodbyes to George Perez. I was just like, because of course everybody on my feed. Mm-hmm. Is mourning George Perez. I was like, I have to stop now. I can't take anymore.
They got to do it. They got to do it on their own way because George put out so much work.
Yeah.
For so long. 75 is when he went pro, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Born in 54.
Yeah, he was 67. They said as he died.
Yeah, and he put out so much work, and on top of that, I think the magic of George Perez is that he's one of those guys that got better. Like he loved drawing. He wanted to draw as many characters as he could. I remember in the 80s, people saying he draws too small. And when you go back and look at that stuff, it's because he was trying to put in every character he could on a monthly book. You know what I mean? Like, so the guy kept getting better. And actually, one of my favorite stories is hearing about Infinity Gauntlet came out. Now, in 1990s, when Infinity Gauntlet came out, and Todd McFarlane was huge. Jim Lee was huge. Mark Sylvester was huge. And I can't believe I'm putting this in a guy who acts like he drove George Perez around and actually sort of homaged some of his work. Rob Liefeld was getting huge.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. So George Perez is at a convention and this kid comes up to him, 8, 9, 10 years old or something, is what I heard how old the kid was. And George Perez signed his Infinity Gauntlet #1. And he said, man, if you keep it up, you're going to be as big as Jim Lee one day. And he stopped his handlers, didn't want him to correct the kid. And he made that decision that he needs to keep up in his game and just getting better. He didn't have an ego. Right. You know what I mean? He was like, I'm just going to get better. That's all I'm going to do. I mean, and I love that. That kind of epitomizes everything, man. He didn't try to crush a kid and he didn't get mad about it. And he understood. He just had an insight. And I will say the time I met him, I got a hug from the man. And it was the first time I didn't mind getting beard burn from a dude. I might have a little scarring from it, and I was hoping some of that DNA got in me to give me some talent.
Yeah, he's one of those guys I never met. Never. Where did he live? Where was his home
Florida,
base?
Miami, Florida, I think, somewhere
Florida?
around Florida. Maybe not. It may be Miami. I'm not sure. I didn't creep on the guy online. You know what I'm saying?
I
But
just
he was down in
realized I had
Florida.
no idea because most everybody in the '90s was New York or California. So
Yeah. Well, we got see who we got here. Well, then we'll do introductions of who we are. All right,
He was from New York, wasn't he? Because he was Puerto Rican.
Yeah, I think originally from New York, and I think Wolfman was actually his editor. The famous story about him, and I'll tell you where I'm getting a lot of this information. I don't want to jump around too much, but here's where I fell in love with the man, George Perez. Was this Cosmic Crossover David Anthony Kraft's comic interview special. I think I've had this thing for 30 years. And this is every interview that the guy did with George Perez, all collected into one edition. And I don't know if this is going to show up. I got a lot of glare. Let me. I'm all over the place. Hold on. I'm upset. I'm sorry, guys. I'm upset. Perez is one of the few people in comics that was beloved by everyone.
Yeah.
He rocked this impossible task. I've never heard a bad word about from anybody that actually met him. Him and Stan Sakai.
George Perez, Stan Sakai, Joe Sinnott, and John Romita are the four beloved people that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. So I think if I remember this interview right, and then I'll shut up for a little bit and we'll do introductions here. This is actually starting to come apart. I've had it for so long. Anyway, I've had this for so long. I read it, but I think Perez actually became a superstar with this White Tiger page.
White Tiger.
What happened was I think Marv Wolfman was either the writer or the editor, but back then the writer and editor were the same person before Shooter came along. And he told me he needed to work on his perspective. And it's one of the few times that somebody got under George Perez's skin. And it was probably, because he was young. So he went out and got a book.
That's a standard criticism you get from editors to young artists because they don't know what to say. Most editors really don't know how to criticize or give encouragement to art. So they always think they say is you have to work on your anatomy and work on your perspective. Those are the two things that editors know to say.
Well,
and they're usually true.
well, again, this is that thing about Perez always rising. You know what I mean? So he went and got a book on perspective, maybe two, and he came in and he was like, look at this. So he did this big, if you can't see it, he took the New York City, he did a little Will Eisner here.
Yeah.
He took the New York City skyline or, the buildings looking down on them and wrote White Tiger in them. And it was all about perspective. And I think that's when people really noticed Perez there.
I've always had a soft spot for Perez too, not only because he was good, but because he entered comics just about when I did. And of course I noticed his stuff right away. I think his this right here, his Avengers Serpent Crown was the first thing I got by Perez, which is Avengers. What issues do we have here? 141 to 144.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember getting this and going, oh, these are cool. And then I started but I think these were back issues to me. They were probably like a year old because I started collecting the Avengers with him on sort of his second run, which was around issue 160.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really got into the Avengers with it was kind of the beginning of the Korvac thing with Ultron and Ant-Man and all sorts of fun stuff. But this is where he really caught my eye. And I was like, because I was 9 or 10 years old, just learning that there are different artists in comics. So I was starting to follow artists. And George Perez was one of the first ones I followed because of these issues.
Yep.
I think he also did some FF right around this same time.
I have those. I didn't pull them out. Like I said,
they're not quite as good as his Avengers were.
I don't know if it was Inkers or what was going on, but he did the storyline with Power Man when he joined the team.
Right. It was solid stuff, but I thought his Avengers stuff was better, way better.
Well,
I didn't look
Joe
at the XL
Sinnott,
stuff and so on.
Joe Sinnott drowned his style in Fantastic Four. When he started on Avengers, his first inker was actually Vinnie Coletta, so it doesn't look as detailed.
Yeah, much lighter.
Yeah, after
And-
Pablo Marcos gets in, it gets much better, and even Perez even lets himself become more dynamic.
Right.
Although
He's
you
got
can
Granger and Esposito too in this one.
Yeah, because the first time this is what kind of really made me like the Avengers were the Perez issues.
Yeah.
And special. Let's see if I can. From the.
Now, I told you guys, and I'm telling myself again, I'm not jumping up and grabbing these books you're talking about.
This page right here.
Let me see if I can get you
Solo.
Hold on. Yeah, see if I can get you Solo. There's gonna be a lot of Solo tonight.
Yeah, with Thor and Moondragon flying through the Old West.
Yes. And I have to say, he even like just a few right around issues like 160, 161, he was even better than he was 20 issues before. I mean, he got pretty good pretty quickly too.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys. I mean, this stuff isn't as strong as the stuff 20 issues later.
Yep.
As you might imagine, he got to draw a lot of comics between over those year and a half that it took him to. So
my first contact was because of the way the Brazilians were publishing the Avengers 1970s Avengers were published after the Black Widow Web of Intrigue storyline, which was my actual first contact. I couldn't find I couldn't pull up the magazine where I have it, but that was my actual first contact with Perez. So I did
a collected edition of it.
Yeah.
From when did this come out?
I think it was like 84, 3.
Yeah, the original came out in 83, 84. This came out in 99.
That collected edition, yeah.
Yeah, I remember it coming out. I didn't pick it up.
It came out in Marvel Fanfare, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is some peak early 80s George Perez here. Good stuff. Here, let's see. Who's inking them on this? We've got George Perez and... come on, give me the credits.
There's different inkers.
Brett Breeding.
Brett Breeding.
Brett Breeding was inking him.
See, and you're saying that's some prime... Perez stuff from like 83, 84. Yeah. We don't know how long that was sitting in a drawer somewhere before they printed it. That's the thing with Marvel Fanfare.
Yeah, it might have been because the Perez was exclusive at DC at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it seems like he went exclusive around 81 or 82 for real. I mean,
George Perez is the reason I started buying DC comics because I was always a Marvel kid.
Well, that's where I'm coming in here. Yeah.
But then he did not only Teen Titans, the Justice League.
Well, I'm about to show you some Justice League. You got anything, Paolo, you want to show?
Sure. I think we're going to talk about, since we're talking about DC.
I'm surrounded by books, so
New Teen Titans was pretty good. I mean, this cover in particular was very, very attractive to me. All the triptych with all these 3 costume characters, and they're all being introduced as new. That stroke was still known as the Terminator.
Yeah.
Is that the Nightwing disco costume? Is that
that's the best one, thank you.
Yeah, because that's the identity here, and Jericho is Deathstroke's son, and of course they tell Deathstroke's origin. And the New Teen Titans at the time it was definitely the best DC comic.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So when I learned the name George Perez, it was because of this cover. This was the cover that made me back up and realize this is when I was really starting to learn the names and mispronouncing them for 40 years now.
Yeah.
Because I read them, but didn't see them. I still have the original, but it was this. I've always had a thing about the Justice League and bad guys and villains and bad guy villains. So this is Justice League 207. This is probably 82. And I was actually getting All-Star Squadron. I'm like 8 or 9, 8 going on 9. So you got the Crime Syndicate coming in, and it was over with. And then all of a sudden I'm going through my little stack of comics. I'm going through the Stepdad's comics, and I'm realizing I've been reading George Perez for years and didn't know it. He had the Man Wolf stuff. He had the Fantastic Four stuff we're talking about. I didn't realize he was the guy that did he did the Squadron Supreme in that Avengers you showed. That's what I remembered. I remember it was the Squadron Supreme. That what I mean. I love it. I was still in characters, so it was Kirby and Perez and probably a guy named Wrightston. There's a little guy and Steve Gerber, Gene Colan. I was starting to learn names. Tom Palmer was a big one at the same time. So this is the one that did it. So I back up. I've got a. You care if I go solo real quick?
No. You're the guy showing stuff. May as well go solo.
So yeah, 207. This is the one I got, the original one. I'll beat up. I read it over and over, and that's the update. And of course, it crossed over with All-Star Squadron, and it was kind of weird to see Joe Kubert's art compared to side of George Perez. So this is where George Perez grabbed me, right? So I back up and I found out, hey, this Perez guy did my favorite Justice League story and did my favorite pinup. He did this one. That's the original. Okay, this is one of the first books I actually traded for. It was all written all over before I got it.
Is that in the 190s?
This is 195.
Okay.
196.
That's when I started buying it because that's when he got on, I think.
Yeah.
But I think he did covers before he did interiors, and even the covers made me buy them.
Yeah, like I said, I've got a box in my Justice League box full of Perez. But I'm going with the ones that popped in my head first.
Right.
This is impromptu, but this was mainly on the villains. So of course I'm loving villains, and this was the book I did a video a few years ago where I was comparing yesterday's books with modern books, and I was like, look at everything that happens on a page. Look at everything that happens in 3 pages and look at everything on 4 pages. And I would compare a new book saying this has already beat it in content of how much information you get. A couple of people made videos trying to counter me. Mm-hmm. And while they were making their video, they ended up losing their argument with themselves. They're like, man, there is a lot going on, But these were the ones that hooked me. I've got upgrades with them, but I'll show you the thing that out of all these books, I sat there and I spent many a rainy Sunday, no exaggeration, just looking at this. And I like to joke around that I was the first person to put this on the internet. But what I did is I tried to find people on the internet, early days of the internet, to put this together as one page instead of 2 separate scanned pages. But it's this fantastic Justice League, Justice Society family photo, if you will. Yeah. This blew me away. I never saw so many characters arranged with so much thought. I mean, I studied this. And that's George Perez for me right there. Mm-hmm. I was a fan before I knew his name. I didn't know who drew this,
Mm-hmm. At the time, I could identify the Justice League pretty quickly, but I didn't know the names of anyone in the Justice Society. Yeah. That when I saw that thing was published, and the Brazilians published that as a filler, and I was quite fascinated by it. But I didn't know enough to know who the Justice Society were.
Let me see what year this was, because I've carried this book since 1981, 41 years. So
wow.
Yeah, that's
time flies.
Yeah, that explains why I'm acting so weird about all this. So, yeah.
Like I said, George Perez, he broke into comics just as I really was discovering who artists were. So he's like, he was one of the first artists I discovered after Sal Buscema and Herb Trimpe, who were the ones who made me discover people. I think he's probably because like I said, I consider myself having started collecting with Hulk 200, right? Because even though I had comics before then, I guess I wasn't paying attention to them like I did after I discovered they had numbers on them and went in a row and made one big story. And I traded my neighbor who had Hulk 201, 202, and 203 a whole bunch of comics to get those ones, and that was the start of my collection, Hulk 200 to 204, and I think it was 203 or 204 that Herb Trimpe drew, and Sal Buscema had drawn the other ones. And I went, why does the Hulk look so different? And that's when I just looked in the credit boxes and discovered that people drew them. And probably George Perez was the third artist I discovered, because I went, I really like this stuff. Let's see who did it. Oh, George Perez.
I'm making myself sit here and not go grab Future Imperfect because I'll have to dig to find it. I'm not doing it.
Well, I've got the collected edition of Future Imperfect here.
Thank gosh. Yeah.
This,
Thank you. Yeah. That was going to
this is
kill
the.
me.
I was just looking at the date. This is from '94, the collected edition. So they actually. It was only two issues.
Yep.
Like what were they? 48-page issues that were. So this is a really. This is a 100-page trade paperback.
Yeah. See, I don't know if you read into it around the time that he was doing War of the Gods off of Wonder Woman. He was also drawing Infinity Gauntlet. He was trying to celebrate Wonder Woman's anniversary, and DC wouldn't get behind him. So we got 3 issues of Infinity Gauntlet, and then he left quietly DC at that time, and I'm convinced that's how he ended up on that book.
But it was just amazing to me that because Marvel didn't really have many trade paperbacks in '94.
Right.
They really didn't. So it's amazing to me that this came out so quickly, but probably because it wasn't an ongoing series, I imagine. Because the idea always was in those days that if you put things out in trade paperback, especially right away, it'll eat into your monthly sales, which it probably eventually did, but now they don't care so much.
Well, go ahead.
But so that this came out so fast is a little amazing.
Oh, I think it came out so fast because it was a huge hit. Like it had tons of buzz.
But X-Men was a huge hit. They didn't put those in trade paperbacks, probably because this wasn't an ongoing too.
Right. So they get these 2 issues out, and it ties into Hulk, Peter David's Hulk.
Right.
But if you can find the page where you're in Rick Jones's lair, where he's went out and had people collect all the remains of the superheroes.
Let's see.
People were dissecting that in comic book shops, and I think Wizard might have popped up and done something. I mean, it was huge when it came out.
This one here.
Yeah, let me put you on solo.
Here we go.
Here we go.
The Rick Jones cave.
Yeah, I have seen that image online. I mean, this is 30 years ago, right? And that is still people's favorites and talked about and pops up online.
There's a lot of good stuff in it. Spider-Man's costume, Thor's hammer.
Yeah. Perez would pack so much stuff in there. It's like you were Easter egg hunting, and he wasn't trying to hide anything. He was like, give me more. Give me more.
Oh, they got Shatterstar's sword.
Yeah. Yeah, but you never sat down and studied that?
No, I never have.
Oh, there's a ton. Yeah, it goes on and on.
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty sure that's the bottled city of Kandor back there.
Yeah, there's Easter eggs in there like that. I think there might be a Watchmen book or something in it. I'm not sure. Not a Watchmen, but Under the Hood. I can't remember. But the thing that got me, I laughed when you had a Sentinel head, the robot Sentinel head.
Oh, yeah. There's
inside of it, it's the rock pieces of the Thing.
Oh, that's what those are. And it's funny. There's in the background is either a photo or a painting of a mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's the gamma explosion that made the Hulk. That's supposed to be, because why else would they have a random picture of a mushroom cloud?
I wish Perez had done more work in Sword and Sorcery. Would have loved to see him on ARAC at DC. At least he did a Kulangath Avengers story with music later and a beautiful Red Sonja cover.
Mm-hmm.
ARAC wasn't really Sword and Sorcery, though. But he did do, if you want sorcery, he did do Solace, however you say that word, at CrossGen. Hey, we lost Tim. This is 2003. And well, there's a nice double-page wraparound. This, not Sword and Sorcery, but definitely sorcery.
Mm-hmm. And then the Avengers run not only the Kulangath story, but also the first arc where Morgan Le Fay rearranges the universe so they think they're in Arthurian times. Mm-hmm. Perez could definitely have been a hit doing pseudo-historical comics, because he was just so creative coming up with all of the designs. It's like he goes back to the Avengers, and the first thing he does is redesigns everyone to look like they're from the Middle Ages.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You're back.
It booted me out of my own show, guys.
When you went to do it, it boots me out when I go to click on a comment sometimes.
Yeah.
But here is definitely sorcery stuff. from cross-gen in George Perez.
Well, the closest I can think, I mean, I'm sure if we really went digging, we're going to find some covers, or I mean, I can picture George Perez drawing some barbarians somewhere. But when it comes to sword and sorcery, man, now that like this is why I love doing this live stream, because things will pop up in your head. But if you go back and look at the Busiek run of Avengers that he did in the late 90s on and on, you can see that he kept improving on and doing things with the Scarlet Witch artistic wise. Like, I mean, he was adding new facial features to her, changing her costume up, really expressing herself. And I got some Titan stuff I'll show later on here about how he ended up making some of these characters like living, breathing people and stuff. What you got, Paolo? You got anything?
Well, speaking of sword and sorcery, a couple of years ago, I picked this up, a reprint of Sword Quest, a comic that was not finished. And this was
Is Perez in it?
Yep, yeah, it's by Perez, because this is a sort of a game intro.
Oh, nice. Oh, man.
And
It's
the
almost
story's
like a heavy metal album.
and the story is kind of based on the 12 zodiac signs.
There we go. Yeah. That looks like some of the stuff he did in Infinity Gauntlet with death and stuff there. Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Look at this.
Getting those mythological creatures in there.
Uh-huh.
And I must say,
And the way he shifts, in the environment from one place to the other.
Yeah,
Unreal.
that's some wild stuff. Wild stuff.
Okay. So,
But let me point out this this stuff. I haven't looked at this stuff in a while. It's definitely sword and sorcery because there's a sword fight in this one. But the inks by what's his name, Rick Magyar. Yeah, Rick Magyar really make Perez look different here.
it's almost like a Greg Land photo.
Yeah, he's using a sort of different style than I usually see on George Perez. I think I usually see pen work on George Perez.
Yeah.
But he's using sort of a different style that's kind of really interesting.
And that's from CrossGen.
This is from CrossGen.
Yeah.
20 years old now. Came out in 2003.
Like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Now, CrossGen, let's go ahead and do it, man. I was going to show something from yesteryear. Oh, well, 20 years ago is yesteryear. I was about to show something from 1982, I think, 83. But it was because of CrossGen that we got what everybody wanted.
Yes.
The Avengers Justice League Avengers crossover finally. Okay. Man, I mean, if I see these, and I got them when they came out. There we go. Is that what I think? No, wait a minute.
That's the collected edition that came out
2008, 9.
Yeah, somewhere around then.
Okay. But we got these 4 issues of the Justice League Avengers, and to me, the way George came off, this may have been the biggest labor. This what year?
2008. This one collected edition came out.
But I think this may have been the biggest labor of love, at least the way he came out. I mean, everything he did, he got behind and put 100% in. But it was because of CrossGen that we finally got this crossover. I hope they're showing up. I mean, look at this cover. I'm not going to unfold it, but I actually, when I first got a desktop back in 2001, 2002, that was all better than anything I'd ever had. I found this online uncolored. I mean, I'm not going to take it out and unfold it, but it's number 3. But I think there's something like 150 characters on this. Okay.
There
or
we
more.
Go.
It supposedly was, here we go. Let me put you on solo and I'm going to talk about that. But I think there actually is at the time every Justice League member and every Avengers on that. I don't quote me on that. You know, I mean, we're talking about a book.
That is a lot of people on this one.
Yeah. So what happened was CrossGen was owned by a millionaire. That is so awesome. But anyway, I found that online, uncolored, and with my fancy new computer, I decided I was going to try to color it myself. You can forget it. I would have been better off just printing the thing out and going at it with markers. That's how I was like figuring. I could figure out how George probably looked at a spot and stuck somebody in the empty spot. There's a giant man or something on there you can see that with. Like I studied that. That's the thing about George Perez's art. If you slow down and look at some of his stuff, it's just unbelievable. And then, you know, you had Phil Jimenez coming in and doing some like a JLA to Z who's who kind of thing. I really didn't appreciate seeing somebody being so George Perez, you know what I mean? Like it was obvious what he was doing. Bless his heart, he's a nice guy. I've heard great things, you know, nice things about him. But you know, at the time, I was a little offended as a George Perez fan, not personally. But we got that because the millionaire who owned CrossGen,
Mark Alessi.
I can never retain his name. I can remember Mark Wade's stories. So Mark Wade with CrossGen,
who died a few years ago.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
But what he did is he built a big studio or renovated a place and put beds and cots in it. And it was a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
And the guy would walk around the floor, sending people home if he didn't like what they were drawing. And Mark Wade had to tell him, you let me run the floor. You let me handle the talent. You need to quit. You know, those are the stories I heard. But George, he put people in under exclusive contracts.
Right.
So George Perez sent an open letter to Marvel and DC and said, I'm about to be exclusive to CrossGen. If you want this Justice League Avengers crap done or crossover done, get your crap together and let's do it. And then Joe Quesada went to, you probably know the guy that he's talking about. But apparently there's somebody at Marvel who's like their unofficial historian. And Joe Quesada went to this guy and said, what happened back in the day? Why did this fall apart in the 80s? And he told him, and I don't know what the story was, but Joe Quesada's response was, are you telling me it was a pissing contest with two people? So Joe Quesada jumped up and made it happen after George Perez.
It might have been Peter Sanderson.
It wasn't him, or I remember that.
Okay, because he's been the official historian at both Marvel and DC, I think, a couple of different times.
I think it's somebody that's been in the office for so long, he knows the gossip and the dirt.
Oh, I don't know who that would be then. Ralph Macchio, possibly.
I don't know. I'm wanting to look it up. Go ahead.
Well, I think Liefeld covered it in his podcast, and apparently the pissing match was between Jim Shooter and Len Wein.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which makes perfect sense.
And then a few years later, neither one of them were at either company, you know. So that's what made that happen. Perez said, "Let's do it." Mark Waid and Kurt Busiek was going to get together and do it. Mark Waid, of course, I think was with CrossGen, but he said Kurt Busiek is 100% capable of doing this story. And I have no doubt in my mind that behind the scenes, I bet you anything, Busiek kind of talked to Waid. Yeah.
This is the cover like I always used to see on YouTube. I haven't seen it in a while. But everybody loves this Superman holding Thor's hammer and Captain America cover. Yeah. Even though I don't think it's one of Perez's better drawings.
Well, he comes up with iconic images that resonate with people, even if it's not his best drawing.
I think people like the idea of the drawing more than the actual drawing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it's cool, angry Superman with Captain America's shield and Thor's hammer. I mean, that's a cool idea. I just don't think, if I were to rank George Perez's top 100 covers, I don't even think this would make it for me. As cool an idea as it is, I just don't think it's his best drawings. One of his best drawings and one of his best covers. So I always find it funny that that's the one people gravitate towards, though.
Man, we're getting a lot of people here with a lot of questions and stories and things that are going on today. So a lot of people today was Free Comic Book Day for people in the future watching this. So we got people who went to Free Comic Book Day and have seen panels like in Chicago and stuff, and they're finding out as they're doing their Free Comic Book Day stuff. Yeah.
That's a bummer to find out on Free Comic Book Day, even though like Free Comic Book Day isn't for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Hey, Graphic Man, you got the link in your Instagram if you want to pop on or invite anybody. Everybody's welcome. So, talking. Okay, so let's see, what did I do? I'm trying to keep this straight. I showed something that I've already put to the side. I showed the JLA Avengers. You showed something there from CrossGen. Tell her what you got.
Well, I already showed the an issue of Teen Titans I have, plus plus the Avengers and Sword Quest. If you want to go to Crisis, I got History of the DC Universe, so you should Crisis first.
Crisis is going to be a good thing. Can I show something that we can jump to Crisis? Probably the biggest event that he's done, even with the War of the Gods and everything that he done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this, I'm going to look up when this came out, right? But this is a DC Comics Presents, right?
Oh yeah,
And I learned years later. You mind if I go solo, guys?
go solo. You don't have to ask us if you're showing stuff. Just go solo.
Hey man, I'm from the South. We're polite. I'm going to do it, but I'm being like, I'm making sure everybody's included.
You're hanging out with a New Yorker now. You're going to be rude at work tomorrow.
Okay, so here's an ode to. First of all, the cover is an ode to Flash 123, the two Flashes meeting where Gardner Fox created the multiverse. I saw Doctor Strange the movie last night. It's meh. And it kills me because this is, DC started the multiverse, not Marvel. But anyway, this came out in 1983. And let me tell you something. I keep buying it, giving it a home. I don't know which one of these is my original that I bought off the rack. But like again, I just started discovering. I got some Titan stuff I'll show later on. But it's like as soon as I heard about George Perez and figured out his name in the comics and stuff, it's like he was everywhere. You know what I mean? Almost like he didn't exist until I found him. That's what it started feeling like, right? But this book, a year before the movie came out, has the same plot as the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator movie. And it's by Len Wein and stuff, right? But I loved this. This was my niche with George Perez. I wanted to see him do more Kirby characters drawn in a realistic style. OMAC #1 was that cover of Jack Kirby's cover that scared me.
The person in the woman in a box.
So I would flip it over so I could go to sleep. And then all of a sudden, here's George Perez coming in, drawing Kirby characters. George Perez may have done something to calm my fears, to accept Kirby's artwork. And now, Kirby.
OMAC is one of those characters that I think only Kirby pulled off for me.
I think Perez and Kirby did it best. Byrne
I think his mohawk is a little too realistic there. Kirby drew it like a piece of art on top of his head. No one else drew it like Kirby. Everybody, I don't know what it was. There's something about that OMAC headpiece
I'll show it again. Yeah, I was wanting to point out some of the panels in here. He drew some great stuff. But let me get the headpiece in here.
To me, like only Kirby could pull off that headpiece. I don't know why.
No, I think Byrne draws it better than Perez.
Yeah, Byrne draws it second best I've seen it drawn.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference is if we're going to go this far, and grain of salt, because I've never really thought about this, had the conversation.
Yeah.
Kirby designed it to be like a God of War helmet, like I'm trying to think I don't know if it's a Roman gladiator or a centurion or Ares God of War, but it was supposed to be like, to represent that helmet. So when you look what Kirby does, he puts a little bit of sideburns on there that kind of curl. And that's black on the sides. I think he's drawn it more like it's hair, but he's keeping in mind that it's a helmet. Everybody else has to get proportionally right the head, and then they put the mohawk on a regular head.
Right. And also with Kirby, it was all about the graphic design, not about the kind of reality of what it would look like. And for other people, it becomes about the reality of what it looked like. Byrne was the one, he did his own twist kind of, but to Byrne, it was all about the graphic design too.
But this book, DC Comics Presents number 61, one of my favorite comics of all time. If I did a top 25 comics, this is going to be in there somewhere. And then, like I said, a year later, we got Schwarzenegger that OMAC comes back in time to stop the robot that come back in time to kill his ancestor. So Buddy Blank is never born. It'll never be an OMAC. And it's in a subway and it takes place. This almost feels like it took place in real time. Like you probably spent 15 minutes reading the book, or at least, I studied it while I read it and stuff. And it feels like it took place in 15 minutes, I think. You know what I mean? But yeah, I've had this since I was 10 and I keep picking them up when I run across them for a good price and they're in good shape. But the stuff that Perez did in this, seeing him do Kirby characters realistically, I was like, that's all I need. I mean, you know,
I'm going to show you my Perez bona fides here. When this is the one that upset me. This is from I forgot this was from Boom, 2014. George Perez's Sirens. And a lot of Perez fans didn't pick this up at the time. I can't remember if he announced his retirement right before or right after this.
What company is that?
This is Boom Studios.
Okay. I
thought it was Image. I'd forgotten, but no, some pretty neat stuff here. The story's a little convoluted, but it was like I was like most Perez fans I knew eschewed this and thumbed their nose at it. And I was like, you're taking them for granted. It's like, because like I said, he may have just announced his retirement or there was something like that going on. I'm like, don't take George Perez for granted. Get his indie book. But, they all wanted George Perez from, the books. They wanted George Perez Avengers, not George Perez Sirens. And I'm like, don't take George Perez for granted. He's got, he's not going to be around forever. This is
especially because he couldn't finish a comic that he had started, another comic that he had started, which I have, but I couldn't locate it. But
is that Crimson Plague?
Crimson Plague.
Yeah, I've got that in here too. But it was like I think there may have been something up with his health. All I know, I was like, George Perez fans were taking him for granted. And I was like, no, even if it's not the best George Perez ever. And the only reason it wasn't the best George Perez ever was the writing.
Tim, can you share the...
There's the actual comic, Crimson Plague.
Did it show up?
I can't tell. While I'm showing in order to get the screen on. Yeah, Crimson Plague. Because this is the Guerrilla Comics version, which I started buying when Guerrilla Comics came out. Only issues number 1 and 2 came out, and after that, nothing else. But it was a very interesting premise, and you'd think it could be badly handled since we're talking about the problem here is all caused by menstruation. But it was a very interesting idea to explore, and I think this could have become a very interesting science fiction comic, and it. Unfortunately, Guerrilla Comics folded after a few months when their investor pulled out. They never said who the investor was, and very few of the line actually came back in other publishers. Crimson Plague. This was actually the second attempt at doing Crimson Plague. The first one issue had already come out through Quesada's Event Comics. There
we go.
Perez expanded that first issue here. And then
watch for number 2 in September '97. I'm still watching.
Yeah, and then he did number 2, and no more Guerrilla Comics, unfortunately, and he never went anywhere. Which is funny. Mark Waid managed to take Empire to DC. Yeah, it took almost 20 years for Carl Casel and Tom Grummett to finish Section 0, another one I had, and Kurt Busiek and Stuart Immonen managed to reprint Shock Rockets as a trade paperback at Dark Horse. But after
there's the very first issue from Event Comics.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that signed by Perez. I don't know if somebody got it signed at a convention or if it came out as it came that way. I don't know, man. But see, the 90s for Perez was actually kind of fun for me because in my mind, I felt like where he wasn't at DC and Marvel, he was having fun. I don't know why I thought that. But you guys are showing his Crimson Plague. He had sax and violins. Was that through Epic or? There we go.
That was Epic.
Yeah, that was Epic.
I think it was around 91 or 92, but it was pretty interesting. The name itself pulls you in because it's obvious, but the fact that Peter David and George Perez did this, it's something that you're not expecting, especially in the early 90s. Everybody wanted to do superheroes because that's where the money was, and they put this out. It's an action thriller.
I remember she was some kind of model and he was her photographer. Was it S&M stuff? And
not completely. I mean, by European standards, this is pretty tame. But
it wasn't gratuitous. I remember that.
Yeah, like in here,
Let me get you back up.
The thing is, it almost looks like a superhero comic, a simple superhero costume, and it reminds you that superhero costumes are and erotic apparel are actually very close.
Well, a little something about George Perez that's not a secret because he put up pictures and stuff, but he attended a lot of S&M conventions.
Mm.
I guess that's what we can call them. I don't know the actual terminology for it and stuff, but he'd just be sitting there smiling with all the ladies and all the guys wearing their leather and rubber suits and their little whips and stuff. And he'd just be smiling in his Hawaiian shirt. It was on Facebook, so I'm not like,
Right.
But in the 90s, he went everywhere, a little bit of Image. I remember somewhere along the line, there's a Spawn pinup that he did in the back of McFarlane stuff. He put out a little team book of Ultra Force there that I've just finally finished. Some of his best stuff, I think. He was just a lot of places in the 90s. I've got some iBots that he did. Was it Techno or something like that? He was just everywhere putting out great stuff that I think a lot of people might be backing up and digging now that he's passed. And that's what I mean. His legacy is huge. We were talking right before we got on here where, I know it and you guys are probably the same, but I bet you I got all these comic boxes and all these shelves. I'm not going to say anything about the shelves, but almost every comic box, I guarantee it's got a George Perez comic or a cover or something he inked or something he wrote,
Here, I don't know, what year did this come out? 07? This Brave and the Bold relaunch.
Yeah.
12
Really
issues. You
nice
did the first
stuff.
12
Bob
issues.
Wyacek was inking them.
Yeah.
And this is some really nice art in this stuff. This was sort of like this was, I think, his best art in a while.
Yeah.
I have the trade what he did before this, but these Brave and the Bold issues are really nice.
Yeah, I have the trade for that, and I also bought the Legion of Superheroes Batman story individually.
Right.
I've got all 12 of those. He did the first 12 with Wade. But you said Legion, and I know I
looks like there were multiple covers too.
Oh man.
First issue, yeah. Bob must have given me some of these because I've got multiple copies of them.
Oh, I got you on solo there. Yeah,
I'm still on solo. You can take me off.
Okay.
I think Scott Koblish took over the inks after a little while. He did a nice job too.
I'll tell you what. After this one, because I'm bouncing off of Paolo, he said Legion. So you don't do that around me, sir. I'm just going to
It was actually pretty fun. I mean, you usually think of the Legion interacting with Superman, and then they interact with Batman, and that was at the time that why is Batman able to do this? Is Batman. Yeah. So he goes to the 30th century and he manages to overpower the Legion of Superheroes, who all of them have superpowers and technology that hasn't been invented yet.
Well,
And he's got bat shark repellent.
We need to make a note. We need to do a show on those first 12 issues. It's Perez, right? But anybody, and I've done this before, to introduce people to the Legion, or anybody that started, bless their hearts, anybody that started comics in the last 10 years. Oh, Graphic Man's on. Anybody that started comics in the last few years.
Hey guys.
What's up, Greg? But I introduced them to the Final Crisis, and you don't have to worry about the Final Crisis, but the Legion of Three Worlds, where they fix, they bring in the three versions of the Legion, and they fix continuity, and they tell this fantastic story. I pushed this on Charlton 66. I've given this to my friends. I've been at conventions and found them in dollar boxes and bought them for people like they're not taking a chance, and they all live the same moment where Polar Boy gets his arm burned off by Superboy Prime, and he makes a glass arm and he's reaching for his Legion ring, like long live the Legion. And Perez Perez draws three versions of the Legion with over, I don't know, 20 characters in each team, and it's nobody else could have done this. This is taken for granted. This is one of George Perez's unheralded classics.
Wow. One of the things I regret I don't have anymore was my George Perez Teen Titans poster I used to have.
Oh man.
It had a giant, it had like the Titans tower and really big in the background and kind of all the Titans running. Really nicely designed poster. I must have thrown it out years and years ago. But
Oh
I was
man.
like,
Yeah.
I still had that one.
Damn.
And I've never read his Wonder Woman.
No, I never read his Wonder Woman much either. I didn't.
I got some Wonder Woman to show. I grabbed 3 or 4 issues and it's real quick, but I grabbed the covers that I remember when I saw them that were amazing. But let's introduce Graphic Man, Jared Osborne and Paulo Costa. Jared, do you know Graphic Man here, Micah?
I've never met him, but I know who he is.
Yeah. I'm glad you jumped on. I'm glad you could come visit me. No,
Well, I've been, I know you guys have butlers, valets, and groundskeepers. I've been mowing the lawn all day, so this is all news to me. So this tragic thing, and then when I just see what's going on YouTube, and Howler says he sent me a link, I was totally unprepared. I don't know if I have every Perez thing lined up, but. And I tried to quickly go back and see what you've already shown, but
show whatever you want, man.
I hear some.
My lawn is about 8 inches high right now. I've been ignoring it so far this spring.
He's phenomenal.
Show it again, man. I got you on solo.
Okay. All right.
Legion of Superheroes.
Reflecto. Who knows who Reflecto really is? You know.
Did he draw any interiors on Legion or just the covers? I don't remember him being on Legion.
Well, for this one, it's the cover, but
maybe
around this time he was doing covers for like Green Lantern, Legion, Adventure Comics. I'm not sure what he did interiors on besides Justice League and Titans at the time. This is classic stuff Graphic Man is showing. I think this is before Levitz and Giffen came on. It might be some Roy Thomas stuff too.
If you guys have these, they're a great way to get the new Teen Titans.
Yeah,
and the quality is just outstanding.
I have some of I still have my original Teen Titans issues, George Perez stuff. I tried rereading it a few years ago. I got bad that flexographic printing. Holy cow. I'm like, I don't remember these being printed this badly. I could barely read the lettering on some issues.
You think you just got bad run?
Yeah. Well, what it is they were using plastic printing plates at the time. So if you got, which would wear out like metal printing plates. So if you got copies from the end of the print run, they were often not that good because the printing plate was wearing down.
This
and
is
I think some of my copies of the Teen Titans were from the end of the run.
I think the big two we might want to end the show with are Infinity Gauntlet and Crisis. Would you guys like to do that after we show a few things here? Because I'm about to bounce off the Titans on him,
Okay.
I mean, it's just an idea, man. Anything anybody wants to do, let's do it.
One of the things that's kind of tragic, it doesn't. Perez doesn't actually draw the issue where Trigon first shows up.
Really?
Yeah, because I think it was Carmine Infantino who had to do
those are fantastic.
No, Perez. There were no fill-ins in that first run.
There were.
I believe you. I'm going to go grab it in a minute because I got the box right there. Like I've said, I wasn't.
I don't remember any fill. I remember that being all Perez. I mean,
so as a poor boy,
I would if Carmen Infantino filled in.
I couldn't afford the DC Comics presents of what was it 26, the first appearance of the Titans. So I had to wait till the backup story came right before they went to the Baxter series in the regular comic that was on newsstand, right? Leading into what you guys were talking about with Trigon. But when these are like Titan #1s and stuff, that's what I was able to get. But it was because of George Perez. Y'all mind if I go solo again?
Sure.
It was because of Perez that this is where I got sick. Everybody was talking about X-Men or they were talking about Titans. And I had one friend who passed away that summer.
Love that cover.
Yeah. But to me, when I think classics, and when it comes to Titan, man, it's the Doom Patrol tie-in.
Yeah.
This is what made me a Doom Patrol fan. And
Yeah, I had not read any Doom Patrol before I read that issue because I was a Marvel kid.
yeah, this is what hooked me on the Doom Patrol. And at the same time, I got a beat up Reader's Digest here somewhere where they reprinted some of the 60s stories, DC Digest, and it's beat up. I tore that thing up. So yeah, Brotherhood of Evil, Robot Man, Beast Boy's connection to him. I mean, I was hooked. And then I'm going to take myself off solo after I saw this when the Baxter series came out. I was reading these a year later when they would reprint them on the newsstand editions. I still have them somewhere, but I'm not digging them out. You got new covers with these, lower grade paper, new covers, right? And some of them were by Perez and stuff, right? But he hit it. And this is the issue that when I take myself off solo, I'm going to find the page. But there's a panel in here where they're all doing a seance. And George Perez had been on these characters for so long. And it was like he and Marv made them such living, breathing people that he does close-ups on everybody's eyes. And you can identify every character just by their eyes. I never saw that in a comic book. So... And then he was innovative. He sits here, and when we got the evil doppelgangers of the Titans, it's his pencils. He went in there and penciled all the bad guys like this with gray tones through the entire book. Ooh. And then he's doing covers like this. You see Trigon, and when you get up close, it's bodies making up the face. The Titans make up that face in their, contortionist way. And then the last Titans book I'll show, this is what I talk about a whole lot. Wolfman, Steve Rude, and George Perez did this one. Tales of the Teen Titans. This is before they went reprint. In 1984, this is number 48. This is a secret crossover with the DNA agents.
Oh, yeah.
This is the DNA agents one. What they did is that the teams are loosely new characters in each one, but you know who Nightwing is, you know who Starfire is, and in this one, you know who the DNA agents are, going down the side of, of each team. So it's the same story told from each team's perspective in their book. And that was the stuff that was making comics super.
Oh,
there he goes again.
He's gone.
Now it's me in solo. Hey there, people.
That's twice it's kicked me out.
Wow.
I will not be foiled.
And I knew I was right. The first issue where Trigon appears in full form, New Teen Titans number 5, was drawn by Kurt Swan.
Oh, Kurt Swan?
Swan.
I don't remember that at all.
I am going to tell you, I wanted to challenge you on it not being Carmine Infantino, but I have no argument. You know what I mean? Like, I had nothing to pull from. I just
it is. Last time I tried to read the New Teen Titans, I don't think I made it till issue 5 because the printing was so bad.
Marv Wolfman, when I talked to him, and I'll show you when I talked to him when we get to the Crisis stuff, he admitted, he told me out of the blue, he said that he stayed on Titans too long. He admits it.
Where are my New Teen Titans?
Okay. Anybody got anything else to show?
Well, I'll show one of my favorites, the Thunder Agents, just because I was really an indie fan. Even like in high school, I loved the indie stuff. So I love the fact I'd never read the Thunder Agents before. And I love the fact that Perez showed up doing these Thunder. He did some of the covers. He did some of the interior. I think there's Ditko stuff in here. That's Keith Giffen there. So this was some interesting. Let me see if I can find some more. Yeah, there's Ditko.
What volume do you have there of that?
This is Thunder Agents Archive, Volume 7. This is the stuff from the early 80s. All the other stuff is from the 60s.
Yeah, I got volumes 3, 4, and 5 of that run, of that archive editions.
There's some Perez right there. He opens the book.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed this thoroughly. This another thing of Perez. There they are. That I really liked. That do I have any over there? I'm
really whited out tonight.
think I only
By
have
the
one
way-
collected edition.
Yeah.
Oh, he's not even in this, but his second run on Avengers from the late 90s. was
Jump
really
in there,
good.
Micah.
I just confirmed. He's right. Kurt Swan did number 5.
Nice.
There we go.
I know you guys believe Paulo, but I like to back him up when I can.
That's what we do here. Yeah,
Yeah, it's weird. I
go
don't
here.
I don't remember there being a fill-in artist on those original were there any more issues Perez didn't draw in that like first 20 issue run or something?
No, until he left, it was only that issue that he didn't
Okay,
draw.
that's interesting because I only say that's interesting because, like I said, Perez was the reason that I started buying the DC Comics. I can't. What issue did you just say he drew?
Issue
Issue 5, maybe issue 6 was the first issue I picked up, and then I went back and got the other one. I can remember. I'm still disappointed all these years later.
Hold on, guys. I'm gonna turn off one of these lights. I'm getting whited out more. My camera.
Like I said, at the time, I was mostly a Marvel kid. So I was probably what year did that New Teens Titan come out? 1980?
80 or 81.
So I was around 14, maybe 15.
Yeah.
And
Keep
I
talking,
had just
Jared. I'm gonna show
started
a
buying the
picture.
New Teen Titans. I think I had issue 6. And there's the one with just the eyes. Cool.
Yeah, I was like 12 years old studying that. Like I could tell
Yeah.
who everybody is with their eyes.
So I found out, I don't know who the kid was. I heard in school that some kid had the first 5 issues of the New Teen Titans that he wanted to trade for some X-Men. And I happened to have a couple of extra issues of X-Men. At the time, the Titans were the hottest, but the X-Men was hot too. And the issues of the X-Men I had weren't that terrific. They were like later burn stuff that I had extra copies of. So we made a deal. We were gonna meet on some street corner here in the suburbs and exchange issues. And so I brought my nice issues of the X-Men. And he had the Teen Titans on the back of his bike on one of those clamp things. You remember those? They were metal. And they had a giant clamp with a spring on it, so you could carry things on the back of your bike.
Yeah,
He had
it crushed
under that giant clamp.
Those
And
crushed
I was just
everything.
like, oh man, because they're of course all wrinkled from the giant clamp. And I was like, but I traded mine anyway because I wouldn't have. I couldn't get those Teen Titans any other way. This is my only stuff. So till this day, I have like the first appearance of Deathstroke with a big clamp mark on it.
Funny. All right, guys. Little do people know, even though these aren't George Perez covers, he is the dude, and I can't believe this wasn't an event back in the day.
Oh, that was a good one.
He's the dude that redesigned Lex Luthor and
Yeah.
Brainiac.
Once again, that was one of the first Superman comics I bought and liked.
And then, like after Byrne left and stuff, they still had some Superman life going on, and he did this annual finishing out the World story, leading to the Kryptonian Man, and that cover, I was just like, I'm so there. He was so good at cinematic covers.
You read the Busiek and Perez Avengers stuff from the late 90s?
I didn't pull it out. I've got almost all of it. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. So Perez brought us Maxima, with a lot of people that absolutely loves her, where she was trying to find a person good enough to breed with her because she was a queen and had like powers kind of like a Kryptonian.
How many times have comic books done that plot?
Not enough. And then I'm gonna go solo real quick. I'm gonna go solo real quick, and then we'll get. I just want to get these out of the way, guys. Sorry.
Yep.
But absolutely looked forward to this. Lynn Wayne and George Perez coming in there. And I remember reading interviews by George Perez saying the research he did to bring the Greek mythology properly in there. That's a wraparound cover. I don't think anybody's ever topped Wonder Woman. And this cover here, as you can see, I got the original and upgrade. I want to get the glare off of this. Now, I want to I'm going to be careful not to overshare, but this is 1987. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I was like 14, absolutely freaking miserable because mom was trying to leave the stepdad again. I'm getting pulled around everywhere. Don't know whose house we're going to. And we end up at the mall. And at the mall, this new store opened up, and it was glorious because it had Dungeons and Dragons stuff. It was a novelty store, and they had a little bit of everything. And I look up, and I see this cover, which I can't get the freaking glare off of. This is Wonder Woman #5. And I picked this cover because I could not get over, again, all the detail where she's fighting a Medusa. It's not so much a Medusa she's fighting. It's a daughter of Ares, I think. But anyway, all these snakes and stuff, that the drama. And this is just for a comic book cover on the newsstand.
Yeah.
And I remember focusing on that and just like, I'm buying this. And I freaking did not have 75 cents on me. And you would have thought I was asking to burn the damn mall down. Give me 3 fucking quarters. You know, like,
I want to forget my troubles.
Yeah, and I'm glad I did because I actually ended up there. Like I said, I never knew where I was going to end up back then. And I ended up getting this. Got back to the mall like 2 or 3 days later on the weekend, and they were all gone. I did the right thing, you know. Give me, I'm going to burn car. You know, did we lose Micah?
Hey, he just withdrew for a moment, I think.
Okay. So we're waiting on him.
There.
Last thing, I'll show 1 or 2 more things, but did I already show this? The David Allen Craft Comics interview.
You showed that at the
all
beginning.
the interviews and art that they did during the.
I think they reprinted a lot of those in some big volumes.
I've
5
got
years ago. Or so.
I got 3 or 4 of them. These collected editions, and they go up to the early 90s. I know that. These people, I mean, somebody finally pointed out that I'm not a hobbyist. When I get on here, I'm an analyst. And I had to think about what they were saying. I'm like, they're right. That's why I don't click a lot anymore. But I really overanalyze things. And I'm more analyst and stuff. So if you want comic book history and you want to read George Perez and hear behind the scenes on Crisis and his mindset and little stories you don't get, you need to go out and get these comics interview books. Square bound. What you got, Micah? I think we're going to dive into Crisis and probably Infinity Gauntlet in a minute.
No, you go right ahead. My wife wanted to update me about the Kentucky Derby, so
That's right.
Right. Oh, listen to this. Kentucky Derby is going on, and he's with us.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll tell you what, right before we got ready to start the show, right, my internet went out once or twice, and then we talked, and then the countdown was hitting, and right when it hit 0, and I was about to hit the button, I heard this huge crash going on. And I walk up the steps, and before I can get around the corner, I hear my wife going, "Oh, everything's okay. It's okay." Going back downstairs, she had dropped a freaking crock pot, you know, but it sounded like death had occurred upstairs, you know. All right, you guys.
Infinity Gauntlet was another one of those. There are 2. Not that I was really that into Infinity Gauntlet, because I was kind of but the 2 most disappointing George Perez series, and they're disappointing because he didn't finish them, are the Korvac one and Infinity Gauntlet.
Okay. Infinity Gauntlet, he did 3 issues.
Right.
And I felt burned by that because I felt like they used Perez to get people to buy it. But for me, what soothed me back is that it was the return of Jim Starlin proper to Marvel. He got fired for killing Robin because if we didn't have Jim Starlin killing Jason Todd Robin, the marketing department called him up after it was done and complained like, "We got stuff to market on Robin. What are you doing killing him?" The marketing department didn't know they were going to do a vote to kill Jason Todd. So he got fired over that. He's the one that took the fall. He'd already had like Gilgamesh 2 and Cosmic Odyssey and stuff going on. And then there's this era that I don't know what he was doing between that and when this came out. But he's back at Marvel. And I do just enough about Adam Warlock. He was a Kirby character. I colored his first appearance, number 67, with crayon because that creepy cocoon on a white cover killed me. He scared me. You know, Kirby scared me, man. So I'm trying to like brighten it up. So it was the return of Jim Starlin to Marvel, where I think he should have been. I mean, he did good stuff at DC, but he was always like talking about like suicide and guns and religion and stuff. Right. When he was at Marvel, it was like taking acid and throwing in some cosmic stuff. Does that make sense? So to me,
I'm a big fan of his 70s work.
Yeah,
I like that stuff.
Yeah, so this was the return of that 70s stuff. He was bringing everybody back to life. He was writing Silver Surfer, doing the cosmic stuff. And then out of the blue, I'm doing War of the Gods, and I'm at DC, and this is 1990, where a comic scene it doesn't come out that often, and there's no internet. Next thing I know, I'm seeing this George Perez cover on the newsstand, and it's phenomenal. I'm like, he needs to go. It's a classic cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the Cocoon. So he comes out with this, and I was on board. I was on board with this, and then he's doing his classic, throwing all the characters in the world he can on a cover, and I'm all excited, and I'm like, great. And then you get number 4. It's got a George Perez cover with practically nobody, and I finally figured out these two mirror each other. This is Thanos's. This is the hero's perspective, looking at Thanos saying, "Come and get me." And this is the heroes coming after his ass. This is what Thanos sees.
Okay.
I never heard. I keep these things to myself because I always hope somebody on YouTube picks up on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, nobody's ever put that together. And then you open up the book and it's Ron Lim.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof, that's rough.
No warning, no anything.
It's like I can remember when I was buying off the stands as a kid, the Korvac saga. Yeah. And it had been building for a while. I mean, a year maybe. And then Perez left, and I can't remember, Bob Brown or someone finished it. I can't even remember who it was.
I think it was Dave Wenzel.
Dave Wenzel and it was just all the steam went out of the story.
I mean, they could have gone with one of with John Arcel Buscema, but they went with Dave Wenzel.
And my command can jump in anytime. Don't feel the need to be polite, brother.
At this point, I'm probably just a spectator, so. I think Ron Lim was not a bad choice to follow if you're going to grab somebody with all his Silver Surfer and Outer Space. It kind of made sense.
Ron Lim is not terrible, but he's a notch below.
I agree.
That was the problem.
I think it was the shock that Perez didn't finish it.
Yeah.
I mean, I liked him on Captain America, but after a while, that's a giant forehead. I mean, but whatever.
Ron Lim.
No, that was Mike Zack was on with the big foreheads.
Ron Lim did.
Ron Lim. It's about the time when Captain America got exposed to that street crack cocaine stuff and freaked out for a while. Yeah,
I know. I read them. It's just been so long, I can't remember.
Ron Lim was on the Silver Surfer books, and he's quick. But what gets me with Ron Lim is that he drew a fantastic Silver Surfer, but I judge an artist on how well they can draw a Galactus, because I tried drawing Galactus at 7 years old and 10 years old and 15 years old. And Ron Lim drew a great Galactus. John Byrne draws a great Galactus. Yeah. Perez drew a great Galactus, and Kirby did. And that's it. I've never seen anybody. Buscema has tried, did pretty good. Mike Zeck did pretty good on Secret Wars,
Ron Lim became a victim of his own efficiency.
Oh, I saw Paolo wave. I'm
like, Mike Zeck.
Middling. Ron Lim became a victim of his own efficiency. Sometime in like the early to mid 90s, he became the guy who, if you needed a story drawn really fast, he was the guy you went and got.
But
so, of course, the quality of his work went down because he's got to draw really fast.
Yeah.
And
let's show people what we're talking about here when it comes to what George Perez was doing in there. So keep talking. I'm just going to show a page or two.
And like I said, and then after that, they weren't hiring him for jobs that he could take his time with. And it took him a few years to like, he was gone for a few years during like the bankruptcy years too. It took him for a few years to him to work his way back into the. Yeah. Well, I think all his editors were probably fired too. That could have something to do with it.
I'm just going to show how he introduced the characters. There's how he introduced. This is how he introduced Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Ditko graphic design.
Here's how he caught everybody up with what was going on with the Silver Surfer's book, where he found out death and had brought Thanos back.
He was so good at complex compositions. It's amazing how good he was.
What I loved is how he brought in all the characters. Wait a minute. I wish we not be able to find it now. But every time he brought somebody in, he did a little design like he did with Dr. Stephen Strange. And I'm on solo
He had a
layout.
little
And I
graphic
couldn't find
design
it.
stinger going on.
Here we go. Thank goodness.
Oh
Captain
yeah, look
America.
at that.
Yeah, so
Very
he did a
nice.
lot of the stuff in the history of the DC universe, which is why I was asking, did anybody have that?
Yeah, I
Hey,
don't
running
have that.
Spider-Man.
Little Spider-Man design stinger. Oh, those are nice.
Yeah.
That's much better than when they use the logo.
There's more, but I ain't gonna be able to find them. But yeah, this is what I'm getting at. It was like what I loved about his Doctor Strange, and I'm not joking, is he made him look like Groucho Marx. I mean, he went heavy on the porn stash, my friend.
Yeah. It's funny. I never really read because I wasn't that interested in Infinity Gauntlet, and I didn't really read it until a couple of years ago when it started coming out in those dollar editions. And I was just buying all those dollar books. So it's like I have
wait a minute,
at
he's got
least
some Ron
3
Lim
issues
stuff.
of the Infinity Gauntlet in those dollar editions now.
We got some stuff to compare, people, if you haven't seen it.
Is that Ron Lim cap? Okay.
We act like everybody watching us was reading comics 30 years ago.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's what he's talking. I think I got rid of the Captain America was the Marvel comic that was on my pull list for the longest time. And in the 90s, it was the only Marvel comic left on my pull list.
Yeah.
But I used to read it and then give away the issues to the kids in the neighborhood. So I think I'm missing all the Captain America issues from the 90s.
Let me say this while Micah was showing you. Micah, can you show up in just one of those Ron Lim books if you don't care? Because I want to make something clear. We're not dissing Ron Lim at all. Ron Lim told some great stories in Captain America Silver Surfer that I talked about. He's awesome. I think he's still around. So I don't want to act like we're like saying George Perez is way up high and Ron Lim's down there, but it's a shock when you think you got a George Perez book and then you open the book up with no warning and it's Ron Lim. It was just a bad timing for him.
I think Ron Lim would acknowledge that it's tough to follow George Perez.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. Awesome.
But
I love how we said Ron Lim and Graphic Man's like, ta-da.
No. But there was a period where in the mid 90s where I couldn't read any Ron Lim anymore because it was so his as my friend John once described it, if they invented a machine that could draw, it would draw just like Ron Lim. And that I'm specifically referring to the stuff when he was hired because he could draw fast. Not prime Ron Lim, but Ron Lim, the guy you would hire if you needed the whole issue drawn in a week.
Yeah.
And
I love how we got somebody with some Man Wolf. Somebody remembers Man Wolf.
That was some of his first stuff too, I think.
I got the box beside me, and I promised I'm not going to pull books.
I think that may have been published later, but that was some of his earliest drawn stuff.
Yeah, he redesigned Man Wolf.
What he designed him as a space hero.
Yeah.
He had a sword and a laser gun.
Well, see, I'm real careful with talking about a lot of sci-fi books in the 70s because in the way I grew up, and you guys probably did too, is you have the world changed. You had pre-Star Wars and after Star Wars. And I hold that as a pop culture historical fact. Right. All of a sudden, anytime all these science fiction was still laughed at and almost dead. And it was like Logan's Run, great, but the effects were funny. I mean, it's
right.
And then all of a sudden you get Star Wars. Then all of a sudden people were bringing back Star Trek, Flash Gordon. Everybody was doing a sci-fi book.
Well, wasn't Logan's Run right after Star Wars? Wasn't it supposed to be the next big?
Logan's Run was before Star Wars, but then you got stuff like this that came out, and Charlton 66 loves this book by Bob Layton and them. But they put a porn stash on him. It really, I mean, cocaine was a hell of a thing in the late 70s.
Logan's Run also reminds me, George Perez drew Logan's Run.
And unlike the movie, Box is actually from the movie is actually menacing in the comic.
And he was also inked at least one issue by Klaus Janson. Klaus Janson over George Perez is some interesting work because their styles are so different. But George Perez's foundation was so good that you really can't
Well,
mess
talking
them up.
about styles, I wasn't going to get my Alan Moore book, but Alan Moore even was involved in the last Superman story by Alan Moore before he got rebooted. They treated the last Superman story like Alan Moore said, the editor, I can't believe it. Was it Paul Levitt? I'm going blank. I can't believe it, but it's in here. They tells the story in this trade I have, but I have like multiple copies of the 2 issues. But they went ahead and decided that what would be the last Superman story. And Alan Moore demanded to do it. They exaggerated the story that Alan Moore reached across the table and pulled over the editor and said, "You're going to let me do it." That's how it blew up. But Kurt Swan came on to do the last Superman story, and Perez got to ink him. And as a kid who grew up on the Superman family books, the Superboy stuff, I mean, that was some of the Super Tot. I grew up on that stuff. This may have been one of the first times I geeked out having Alan Moore, Kurt Swan, and George Perez on a Superman book. And I'm like 14 or 15, you know what I mean? So he inked it. Then they brought in the Swanderson team for the last one. But I think George Perez was like hugely honored to do some Kurt Swan stuff, be able to ink it. So,
have you guys read any of the Logan's Run that George Perez drew?
No. I flipped through it, but I've never read it.
I remember it being decent, but I haven't read it in so long. My opinion is expired. So I'm going to. I think I still have a few issues, but I never had the whole. It's only like 6 or 7 issues, but one of them is the first solo Thanos story in the back. So that one goes for big money, and everything else is dollar bin fodder.
Exactly.
Here's what's funny. I just remembered this. I don't know what the article is saying, but here's Mike Zeck's Galactus. They took a panel out of Secret Wars by Mike Zeck. So there you go, Paolo.
Well, what did really good there was making everything look big and grand. And
one of the things when I was doing my John Buscema Artist Edition book, one of the things I noticed is from that period in the Avengers when Hawkeye was Giant Man in the 60s, John Buscema just did such a good job with the scale of Giant Man, which isn't always easy, but he did such a good, especially on the covers. He just looked so cool, Giant Man on the covers. The one with him reaching up through the staircase, especially.
Yeah, not to be all over the place and stuff, but do you want to know what the least favorite thing that George Perez ever worked on besides the character Vibe?
What was that?
You remember the Sergeant Pepper Bee Gees movie that came out that I gladly own a DVD and VHS, and I had the album because I love the soundtrack. He did the adaptation for it.
He did? Wow. I don't know if I have that or not.
You probably very few people in the United States do. It was supposed to be a Marvel Super Special number 7.
Oh, so it wasn't?
It wasn't published in the United States. They ended up publishing in Germany.
Okay.
Sergeant
Then I definitely don't have it.
Yeah. Sergeant Pepper is probably the least favorite thing I've done in my life.
Because I got all my movie adaptations from the Marvel Super Special. So if it didn't print there, I probably don't have it.
No, that's the thing. They pulled it from distribution, so it never reached the stands.
Okay.
But somehow the Germans managed to print it, and I don't know how.
Well, guys, I got about 30 minutes left.
Okay.
Give or take. And like I said, you guys are welcome to keep going if you want. I'll come down here and check it.
30 minutes is good for me.
We
were on for 2 hours, 45 minutes last night.
Nice. But this is the stuff I love, man. These extras of George Perez that he done for interviews talking about Crisis and with him, Amazing Heroes. This one is before Crisis, let you know what was coming. And this is where I'm going to humble brag, but these are all copies of Crisis on Infinite Earth, and I have 1 through 12 that I got month to month. And then in 2013 or 14, I took those books that I reread and read, and I'm surprised they're still held together. And I was able to get George Perez and Marv Wolfman to sign all 12 issues. Yeah.
I ran back to get my Logan's Run. I've got 1 through 5 and 7. Somehow I never got issue 6.
Well, the movie adaptation is only 1 to 5.
Yeah. That number 1 is the best cover, Jared. That's out of all.
There's Perez and Milgram.
Yeah.
Let's see who inked him on this. Yeah, Klaus Janson. Wonder if he inked the whole adaptation. But it's interesting seeing Klaus Janson's style on Perez.
Yeah.
Let's see. Did he go through issue 5? Got 2 copies of issue 5 and none of issue 6.
I think by issue 5 they had already done the whole movie.
Let's see.
And then they had some like, let's go back and tell a little bit extra stuff for
more David Anthony Kraft, George Perez, and Klaus Janson. So I guess part 5. So I guess this is the end of the movie. Yep. There he is seeing the old lady.
Are you going to share, Jared? No.
Sure. We'll show you some Perez and Klaus Janson stuff.
Well, the old man
Pretty
is
neat. There's I always like this cover too.
Yeah.
With him wanting to drive, but you know, Perez is so kind of smooth generally, and Jansen's got a much less smooth inking style. So it's an interesting combination. Especially since, let's see, what year did this come out? 77.
Yeah, I used to have the novel. The movie does not resemble the novel, really. I lost the novel.
I didn't read the novel till years later, and it was one of the few times I liked the movie better than the novel, because I found the ending to the novel to be ridiculous.
Yeah. Kind of.
The movie Wanted, not to get off track here, the movie Wanted with Angelina Jolie, based on the Mark Miller book, it was better than the comic. They knew exactly what to cut out of the comic. There we go. Hold on.
There's Graphic Dog.
We got a debut here. You've seen Shiva the cat, and now we have who's this?
This is Graphic Dog.
Graphic Dog.
His name is Rex.
Issue 7 is Tom Sutton and Klaus Janson. Interesting. But this is some George Perez that probably is never going to be collected. Logan's Run,
right?
Because they don't own, Marvel doesn't.
No.
MGM owns the copyright on it, the trademark.
So I was talking about the Crisis book here. Would you like to hear the story behind this? And here's what's funny. Thanks to me telling people about George Perez passing away, I was able to figure out what my mom was doing and why she was pushing me not to read this. Would you like to hear the story?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So when I was about 10 years old, we had a guy, I think we were living with my grandmother again, or something was going on, right? But there was a guy up the street who he was an elderly gentleman, and he fell off of a ladder, and we didn't know how bad he was hurt, but they were sort of making some gay remarks about him being gay, kind of being funny, kind of, and I don't know what's going on, but I was in the back seat with my G.I. Joy hissed tank, and all of a sudden out of my mouth, I'm like, that man got hurt and he's a human being. Like all of a sudden I got all, I don't know, better than now, like taken up for him and just like slammed both of them. Right. And it got real quiet in the car. About 2 years later, it's Halloween. And like I had 2 or 3 friends I was going to hang out with, but it was also like the day that Crisis number 11 came out. Right. I'm all excited. I'm like 12 years old and I'm on the Crisis. I'm like, I got to read this. I don't know how this is going to end. It was killing me and all this stuff. Right. So my mom looks at me, was like, no, you and the girl across the street, I'm taking y'all out for Halloween tonight. You need to go get dressed up and figure something out. I'm taking y'all out. And I don't know what's going on here. I'm like, what? And like, I'm 12, right? I don't remember where we went, but I was like, well, I'm going in here. As soon as we were close to a place I could buy comics, I went in and got this. Next thing I know, we're at McDonald's and it's full of kids and I'm sitting there and I'm reading this while we're at McDonald's, and my mom elbows me, and she's like, she's pointing at her like, you're being rude. And I'm like, I'm trying to read my comic. I stick my nose back in it. Right. I could care less, right now. I mean, she was a pretty girl, and, so and I remember mom just looking at me and she was like real worried. And I'm serious. She acted really weird around me for about a week. When I was about 6 or 7 years ago, my mom revealed to me they were glad that I just started dating girls. They thought I was gay, where I took up for the gay man.
Yeah.
I just put all that together a few years ago. Like, and I'm honestly, and I had to bite my lip because I was I really had this thing like, so what if I was? I didn't want to have this conversation because,
And then I was just looking at these Logan's Run, and on the back of my pile of Logan's Run is Free Comic Book Day Infinity from August of 2013. And I'm like, how did that get in the back of my Logan's Run? And I flip it open, and in the back of it is the Thanos story from Logan's Run number 6. I'm like, I must have stuck it there 9 years ago because this is in it. By Mike Zeck was the artist on this one. But I'm like, oh, no wonder it's in the back of the Logan's Runs.
You need to leave yourself a note in the back of that bag.
Yeah.
well, I'll tell you what, let me show some stuff here, then we'll have a little bit of a free for all there. You know what I mean? Like, okay, get this out of the way. But the Crisis, I think Perez, it goes without saying about the Crisis. I was going to like pop some open and show the big crowd scene, the iconic things, but I'm going to show some things that a lot of people don't know out there that go to Crisis, and it's new. Newer George Perez stuff. Okay, let me go solo real quick here. Okay, so this came out in 2010. Lynn Wein got together and they decided to spend, I don't know, I think there was 9 issues of this or 10. It's called Legacies, and they had variant alternate covers, and it was the history of the DC universe, right? And they gave Crisis a 2-parter on this one, right? So here's number 5 with all new art. And it feels like 1985 all over again. I hate that I got so much glare in here tonight. Then here's number 6, where you find out it's the Anti-Monitor they're fighting with all, he's nailing it. And these actually go together. Okay, so if there's ever a poster, besides, I should have got the Batman, the Outsiders, and the Teen Titans crossover because Perez and Aparo did covers for that connected. So there's new Crisis stuff there. Where did it go? And then there's like a ton of homage covers where a lot of people you can get online. What I'm trying to think what the Michelangelo statue is that this is based on or something, man. But there's like a ton of these covers, and they go back all the way to like Jack Kirby on Thor, Batman, and there's a Batman story from the 50s where he's carrying a dead Robin on an alien planet and stuff. Yeah. So this is an iconic cover from number 7 where Supergirl died. And I pick these up whenever I find one. And these are just the ones I put with Crisis.
It actually goes back to the Egyptians with who is it? Horus on the lap of that's what the medieval guys were copying with Jesus on the lap of Mary. Is I can't remember the Egyptian god's name. I think Horus. He's on the lap of his mother.
Well, I know all this stuff like you do, but you probably know it for different reasons. But I learned all this stuff because of comics, because of George Perez doing that. I found out about the Michelangelo statue. I found out in comics. It started comics first, finding out these covers. I think even Wizard Magazine did a whole layout of all the comic book covers, and then people were adding on to it online for years. And then it led to the Michelangelo and all the stuff you're talking about. I've read all the people talking about it before.
Maybe Paolo can tell us what La Pietà means, because I think it's in Italian or P-I-E. Pietà. It must have something to do with mother or death or something.
It means mercy.
It means mercy? Ah, okay. Because it's usually Jesus, after he's come down from the cross, is on the lap of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, we'll wind this up and we can hang out a little bit afterwards. Don't run away, Graphic Man. We've had people over the years that as soon as we say the show's over, they're gone. We're like, what? But anybody got any last words they want to say about George Perez?
Well, we have the history of the universe.
He didn't know George Perez passed away.
And so they put this out with an Alex Ross cover, which was kind of a fashion at DC back then. But the interior is, of course, George Perez drawing how the universe now was.
After Crisis, they decided to give us a history so people would be on board with what did and didn't happen. And he's got a piece in there of Batman I absolutely love. This was 2-issue miniseries when it came out.
Batman.
Mind the Comics gives us the spelling of La Pieta. Piet, accent over the A.
The accent should be to the to the other way. It's an acute accent.
Accent aigu. Accent aigu and accent circumflex or something like that.
Yeah, I love that picture of Batman. It seems like there's one with a profile in there too, but it may not have been in that miniseries. Let me answer this question real quick after you. Yeah, let me look at this stuff. He just
Ultra the Multi-Alien, Deadman, Zatanna, Metamorpho.
See, this is what amazed me, even as a kid when I was reading this. He did 12 issues, drawing hundreds of characters a month. And then all of a sudden, this 2-issue miniseries comes out, and he's not burnt out at all. He's more artistic than he started out.
What about this one? We've got Steve Savage in the Enemy Ace on this one.
Yeah. This is fantastic stuff. Let me answer this question real quick. If I end up going to Heroes Con, I'm going to be making a video announcing I'm going to Heroes Con. And we got Wilson. Here we go. We got somebody else.
Hey,
what's up?
There's Wilson. I don't think you've met Wilson. Tim, this is Wilson. He's been doing our show on Friday nights with us sometimes. He's a formal Marvelite. Did you know George Wilson, by the way?
I did know George only through art returns.
Okay. At one time he was the art return guy at Marvel, which meant he had to return the art to all the artists. So he got to know a lot of the artists that way. But you didn't hear? He just messaged me because I sent him an invite at the beginning of the show that he said he just got back from the movies. He didn't realize he passed today. So
yeah, I had an early day. I was up. I was out, and I haven't been on the internet until now. Just as I saw your message pop up, I read your message just a little while ago. I mean, I knew he was sick, and it's not much of a surprise kind of a thing, but I did not know until I read your message. So, but Tim, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So much about you. Nice to know you actually do exist.
On most days, 5 days out of the week.
The thumbnail still says, "Where is Tim?" on the
Tim the Sorcerer too.
With Tim the Sorcerer.
But I think that the Batman picture you were looking for was this one with the Outsiders in JLA Detroit.
Let me see.
Nice. And I hate the JLA Detroit, but that's a cool picture.
Uh-huh.
I think Perez had some, at least when he did JLA Avengers, he made a comment about some soul searching about drawing vibe, or he was such a stereotype in the 80s. Wilson, we've spent hours talking about George, showing comic book covers and all that stuff. You got anything you want to say about George, since it just kind of hit you? This was very cathartic for me, honestly.
It's one of those things that I was a fan of George for pretty much as long as I've been in collecting comics, which is going on 30 plus years now. I've been collecting comics since 1983. So those are the years of me really into comics. I mentioned this to Jared before, that the best years of your comic book years, I think it's the first 10 years, when you discover them, and there is no wrong in those comics, no matter how bad they are looking back. So, George was very pivotal being there. I've always had, and I've never had this conversation with George, and I always meant to, about how being Puerto Rican as myself, being from the Bronx, there was this kinship of just knowing that here's a person that did the things I wanted to do. Being a fan of comics, being a superstar of comics, I wanted, that is the type of thing that I can relate to. That here's a fan, here's a person who went through the motions of becoming the artist that I would always want to be myself. And there's this kind of thing where it's like, he's created so many characters, he's worked on so many characters, and just the just the idea of being able to do that, even a little bit. I was able to work for Marvel for a while. I was able to work for DC for a while and kind of follow in those steps. I'm not a penciler. I really cut my teeth in coloring and lettering. I can ink, I can pencil, I can do all that stuff, but not as proficient, not the way he was doing it, details and stuff like that. The only thing that I never got to have a conversation with him about was the creation of characters that were supposed to represent Spanish people or Puerto Ricans and stuff like that. And Vibe was mentioned, but I think Vibe became something different years later. For me, it was White Tiger. And here's a character that was created by George. I never felt that character was treated correctly. And again, I've never had to get this conversation I always wanted with him, is because I had this anger for that character where I don't know how familiar you guys are with the White Tiger, but here's a character that he got the amulet that belonged to a previous group of characters. And I forget their name. I think it's part of the Master of Kung Fu line or thereabouts, where you have Misty Knight, who's part of it, kind of a thing. So each part of the amulet gave these guys different powers, or it enhanced their karate powers, and they decided to toss it away. And so now you have
Sons of the Tiger?
I believe it is Sons of the Tiger.
I wanted to think it was like a tiger head and then a tiger paw and a tiger paw, but I didn't want to interrupt them or anything.
Right. So that was the amulet. It was, and if I remember correctly, I mean, I'm going back years.
Yeah.
They tossed out the amulets. And I believe his name is Hector.
Keep talking, Wilson. Keep talking.
Hanging out in an alleyway, as Puerto Ricans do. That's what it seems to be telling me. And he found the amulets and he gained powers from it. And I was only introduced to the character through Spider-Man. So I only knew him through the Spider-Man stories. And he was a character that was hard for me to follow because he didn't make too many appearances. But the few that he did, I didn't like what they did with the character. Because, you know, here's a character that was in an alleyway where he finds the amulets to get the powers. He has the powers. He doesn't have them for long. In the Spider-Man book, he gets shot and decides after he got shot, I'm quitting. I'm not staying doing this. So here's a superhero that the first real bad thing that happens to him, he quits. And I just never liked that what they did with him. Then eventually he comes back in Daredevil, and this is like a 30-year gap or so. And again, I'm just trying to go through memory when we last saw him and when he comes back. And he's on trial for something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he threatens
Loitering in the alleyways, I'm sure. But go ahead. Yeah.
And then he threatens cops to get shot. And I think that's how it ends his tenure as the White Tiger. And eventually, I think his niece gets the mantle. And I didn't follow the story from there.
Yeah.
Now, I obviously can't blame George because I don't know who was writing it at the time. But it was like one of those things like, here's a character that was created. People didn't know what to do with him. And could he have become a role model? I look towards him because, you know, he's a superhero that's Puerto Rican. And there wasn't many Puerto Rican superheroes. At the time, Marvel had very few, if any. And the next Puerto Rican superhero to show up, or Hispanic one, was when Marvel had these annuals and they were introducing new characters in these annuals. Speedball was one of them. Mm-hmm. And another one was a cockfighter. So what representation were we getting?
Cockfighter.
They had a Cuban.
The Battling Banton, I think it was.
Battling Banton. Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, Wilson, keep talking. If somebody shows a book, I'm just going to put them up for a minute. But you keep talking.
That's a UK comic.
But again, that's how I got introduced to the White Tiger.
Awesome.
Was through Spider-Man. So he appeared in the books, and I thought it was a really cool thing that Spider-Man and the White Tiger were just about going to school together. I think that's how he was introduced in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man stories. So that's where it was like, oh, that's cool, because I was already a Spider-Man fan, and I was relating to Spider-Man in the sense of a character who has problems type of thing. And so I get introduced to White Tiger. It's like, oh, cool. Not only is another character within the story that I like, he might become one of those reoccurring characters, superhero friends of Spider-Man. Again, growing up, my favorite cartoon show was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So I thought this was kind of like the start of an Amazing Friends series, because they're introducing a character into Spider-Man, and he doesn't stay all that long. So, you know, that was my connection with learning then, oh, who created this character? And it was like, oh, okay, it's George Perez, who I think at the time was on Teen Titans. So that's where I recognized George from.
So what I want to get out of this is you know, you discovered this character by George. Was it in '83 you discovered him?
Yes. No, probably like 85, I would say.
And then, okay, so from 85 up until the end of the 80s and into the 90s, you followed this George Perez creation. That's interesting. I mean, we do that with a lot of characters, man, but you went on a journey with that one. So that was fantastic. He
didn't have many appearances. But that was the thing that I always wanted to have a conversation with George, and I never did. But years later, when I got into art returns working at Marvel, which is 1993, 94, I was at Marvel. And so I would be dealing with George only in the sense of having to return his artwork to him or to his art rep at the time.
Okay.
And I would talk to or see George only at conventions. And he was a blast at conventions. He loved being with his fans. He also loved, one of the clear memories I have of him was we were in San Diego Comic-Con. I don't know what year it was, because I did 10 years of San Diego Comic-Cons. But at the time, there was a auction going on, and it was a live auction on the floor. I'm not sure which benefit, probably Hero Initiative, if anything. And previous to the auction, there was live sketch shows and stuff like that, where he was very much into not only going to signings at conventions, but participating in events and stuff like that. And one of the things was an auction for the artwork that was being done previously in the art show. And he was having a blast there. He was bidding, he was jumping up and down. He always wore that iconic, he always wore a Hawaiian type shirt at all the cons that always had prints and stuff like that, which I believe his wife would make for him. That he would find a pattern, she would make a shirt, and he always wore these at cons. So my fond memory of him is at this con, bidding these auctions, just having a blast on stuff like that. So I always had great interactions with him. At conventions, I always made it a point to walk through artist alleys to say hi to the artists, because I always dealt with them on the phone, but never really face to face. Only a handful of people would come into the office, because Marvel employed artists from around the world, and the only times I really got to see them was when I was walking around.
That is fantastic, man. Awesome. See, Weaver says, if not Perez, he would not have been a collector. Started with the death of Superman, went back and read Crisis, and knew that the hobby's worth pursuing. We'll check your Twitter, sent you a link if you want to hop on. That was a fantastic story.
You know,
So
regarding
here's what I want to do, guys. I want to jump off for a minute. I'm gonna go check on the wife where she's packing, make sure she's okay, and keep going, man. I'll be right back.
Eric, bring my pop up in a minute.
I saw that. That's why I'm hurrying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Regarding the White Tiger, from a story point of view, I kind of understand why he would quit, because it was not normal for superheroes to get shot back then. Mm-hmm. But from a marketing point of view, that was a terrible idea. White Tiger had a simple yet distinctive design.
Yeah,
which is not the norm for George Perez. because you know how complicated some of his costumes are. But and then in terms of marketing, is great for toys and cartoons. Even though he came from the kung fu craze, he had enough of a backstory that he could would have allowed him to survive that craze if they wanted to have a martial artist just and do something specific with him as a more streetwise character, especially at the time because when they were trying to bring back do something more with the Punisher. There was Frank Miller's Daredevil. I think it would have been a good idea to have a decent martial artist on the street with an easy costume. So I really don't get why it wasn't attractive to other writers or even or there weren't any editors who liked the character. It escapes me.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I'm happy that the character does still live on. Now that I forget who the name of the female character that the White Tiger is now, but she eventually is on the television show. She was in, I think, Ultimate Spider-Man was the last time that character I saw was being used, and I haven't bought comics in quite some time, so I don't know if she's being used in the comic book currently as well.
By the way, Wilson, did I ever tell you Thomas Velasquez's comment? A co-worker of ours at Marvel, also Puerto Rican.
Oh, wait a minute. Graphic Man. Okay.
He just popped up. One day, I can't remember how it came up. We started talking about, what's his name? The Tarantula. And Thomas was like, oh, God, I hate the Tarantula. And I was like, you hate the tarantula? Why do you hate the tarantula? He's like, another Spanish stereotype. I'm like, what was stereotypical about him? He's like, pointy shoes. And I was like, I never thought about that before. Because that was
little things that pop up and stays with you because it's like, is that our representation? Is that the closest thing we're going to get? And again, it's one of those things where you just never really know what's going to hit, what's not.
Right. And I once heard someone describe it as it's not that the stereotype is offensive, it's that all you ever see is the stereotype.
Right.
Kind of thing. It's like you don't if the stereotype was one amongst 100 of what other ethnicity characters, no one would care. But only the stereotype shows up all the time. So that's what people really don't like. That's like one of my favorite lines ever too was from what's his name? Was it George Lopez? I think it may. He was a Spanish comedian. He was on the Stern Show once, and it was when that dog was
the Taco Bell
for
dog.
The Taco Bell dog was big, and some Mexican Americans were getting upset at it. And his line, which I really understood, was he's like, people really aren't upset that the dog is Mexican. People are upset that the most famous Mexican is a dog.
Hold on here, guys. I'm trying to get Breen in. Hold on.
And I went, you know what? I can understand that.
I can't. Hold on, Breen. I'm coming. I'm trying to get you.
I noticed it happened more with Hispanic characters, but it bugs me with anyone. It's the way that writers create the dialogue for people whose characters whose first language is not English.
Oh, jeez. My God, the French characters get it the worst.
All right, guys.
There is nobody in the history of comics who ever wrote a French dialect that a French accent that sounds like a human being.
Yeah.
All right, we got Eric Breen has popped in here.
Hello.
What up? 3, 2, 1.
I already opened the can, so totally unprepared.
Yeah, Eric Breen. This is like the journeyman of like YouTube. Like I could look up a random comic book channel I've never seen or heard any before, and within a day, Breen pops up on it. It's amazing.
There is a chance.
So, Breen, we're just having a little round table here today. This has been cathartic about the Perez thing. I think you've been watching. You know what's going on. But what do you had there, man? Since you just popped on in here and stuff.
Well, some of this is going to sound, repetitive in about 3 days because Yule Carter had Joe Corallo and myself on the other night to eulogize Neil Adams. And at the end of the stream, he goes, "Well, I probably won't have you guys back for a while unless George Perez goes."
No.
So it's not the way I wanted to be on his show 2 weeks in a row, nor was it the way I wanted to, not cross this off the bucket list. But George Perez was, I've been reading comics for so long. He was the up and coming artist when I started.
Right on.
I think he started just as I started reading. He was the third artist whose name I knew.
He was doing the art on the Avengers and the Fantastic Four.
Right.
So I just naturally assumed that he'd been there.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that he had just basically started both books and had done, I think, Creatures on the Loose prior to that. So, I mean, he was very, I was just blown away by how dynamic he was.
I remember one of the first issues I got from him, which was a slight back issue to me. It was probably a year or so old, was his Avengers debut. I forget which issue it was, 141 or something. And it actually says, they're like introducing George Perez. I was like, introducing? This guy hasn't been around for a while? That blew me away too.
Yeah, you started a few months before I did. My first Avengers issue was 149, but my first Marvel comic was Fantastic Four 167. He'd been on the book for about 4 months by then.
Yeah.
So I said I had no idea he was new.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I consider my first comic I had comics before then, but the one that started my collection was Hulk 200. And that right after that, I started noticing names and was really a collector. So, like I said, I think the first issues I remember buying off the stands of the Avengers were around 160, 150, 160. But I had some of the stuff from the 140s. I don't know if I had them already or I traded someone for them, because it's weird how I don't remember getting any comics before Hulk 200, but I know I had them.
Yeah.
And I think we might have mentioned before, but isn't it wild how just a few years difference? It's like, to me, Perez was always there and always going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think that was the way with you and Adams, a few of you guys and stuff like
Right.
that. It just always amazes me how that just a few years changes people's perspectives on that.
Like I always say, to me, Neil Adams was like an absentee father, because the late 70s, like from 75 to 80, was sort of my prime, 9 to 14 buying comics. And Neil Adams wasn't really making comics during that era, but I heard all about him. Other people go, "Oh, Neil," you'd hear about Neil Adams, but I couldn't get any Neil Adams comics.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, because we kind of touched on that the other night. He was primarily a cover artist during that time.
Yeah.
And I remember the Superman cover where he's like coated in kryptonite. He's about to die. And it's just like a close up of him, like with his fist balled up. So, I mean, in those days, you didn't have access to a lot of back issue material.
No, I hardly had any.
And, comic book places would pop up and go away just as quickly. So I saw that, I saw Adam's art and said, man, the same thing. It's kind of like blown away by how great he was. And it wasn't until I did have the Batman Treasury with the Ra's al Ghul story.
Didn't have that.
But because that came out in 76, about 2 or 3 months after the Superman Spider-Man Treasury. And so, I mean, I had that was like the first exposure I had to his sequential art. And
I was a Marvel kid too, so I really wasn't paying that much attention to DC.
I didn't know.
But Perez was there. Perez was there. Perez was what finally got me to buy DC Comics in 1980 when Teen Titans came out. Otherwise, I was a Marvel kid before then. By that time, I was 14, 15. I was like, Perez is going to DC. I may as well go get some DC Comics then.
So, by the time I was starting college, and I was still kind of buying. I was still buying Marvel, but I'd given up on DC by then, and that was what got me back. Was finally, because again, there's no comic book shop to go to and say, why aren't you getting this, idiot? So, I mean, I just happened to catch on the stand and said, wow, this is good.
My first comic book shop opened up in my local area the summer I turned 15. So before then, it was what I always refer to as the suburban kids comic book network, where you'd hear that some kid down over the 3 streets down was selling some comics. You'd walk down to the street, see some kids there, and say, "Does someone here selling comics?" And they'd say, "Oh, Jimmy over in that house." So you just go up to Jimmy's house and knock on the door and say, "Is Jimmy here? Is he selling comics?" And then you'd go in and buy comics for a nickel. That was the only way I got back issues.
Yeah, first LCS I went to was a guy's basement.
One of those opened up too, right about then. I only remember the guys because, like I said, we would buy comics for a nickel from other kids, and this guy was selling them for overstreet prices, and we were like shocked. We were like, "Whoa, whoa!"
George Perez actually
$1.35 for an old comic.
Let me tell you how I don't know, innocent and friendly the original YouTube comic book community was. I just realized what the first big controversy was. What guy was? This was the early days of like Google doing things like this and StreamYard, where it was all new. We've been using Skype just to record by voice, and then I think we used Skype to record and then upload, and then finally Google gave us a Hangout, and it was all new. And one of the first things that ever happened is that a bunch of guys were sitting there and we were watching him. I remember the dude, but I didn't like him because he wasn't joking with us. He was making fun of us. And I was like, I see through you, man. Anyway, he got on there and he was like, I think George Perez is underrated. And everybody knew I was in the chat. And that was like the first controversy. Oh no, he said something bad about George Perez. And that's how well everybody got along. Everybody wanted to make sure everybody was okay when something like that happened. I was like, if he doesn't like George, it's okay. It's okay to be wrong.
Well, you said under. Did he say he was overrated?
Overrated or whatever. Yeah, overrated.
Okay,
overrated. I can't say those words in a sentence. George Perez overrated. I can't do it. I can't finish the sentence. But that was how friendly this community was and how tight we all were. Even the guys that were jerks got it. We were all still friendly. You know what I mean?
I have met people who haven't liked George Perez's art. Arlen Schumer pops to mind.
Well, yeah. Well,
because I've heard him say stuff that I don't know if you know who he is. He's a comic book guy who rubs a lot of people the wrong way on social media. He's an artist and comic book fan. And I've seen people get into fights with him over George Perez.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to get into a fight about now. Did you bring enough cake for everybody, Mr. Graphic?
The cake is a lie.
we never get any on Wednesdays either.
Well, I'm thinking cake would have been nice for Wilson's first time, here.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I tell you, Jared saying that he was a Marvel kid, it's like that's the way I started. It was Marvel kid. I only started picking up DC books because I ran out of Marvel books to buy. At that point, I was reading everything. The last book that I picked up to read in my rotation was X-Men, mainly because it had so many words, Claremont era. And so then I was, I've known of Superman, and a memory just clicked talking about Adams, Neil Adams, is that in my library, in my school library, I went to New Rochelle, junior high in New Rochelle, New York. And in the library, they had one graphic novel, and it was a Superman book. It was Superman from the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yep.
And so that was like where I wasn't fully buying comics yet, but I was into the idea of comics. And then before I would say, I mean, I've always known comics have been around forever in my life. My cousins had them, so they were always around. But I wasn't collecting, I was reading at that point.
Right.
And they had that book. And they had a great story that it took decades for me to finish it. And it is a story, and I don't know why you would put a comic book story into this big trade paperback and not finish the story. And it was a Neil Adams Superman where he's fighting, I forget who he's fighting, but at the end, Superman gets hit so hard he hits the sand. And he gets up and resolves whatever. But the sand creates a duplicate Superman. So I remember this beautiful art of him just the sand Superman getting up, and it ending saying that he will find Superman, kind of a thing. And then that's where they left it off. The next story in the book was like a side jump to whatever it was, and it was like, oh, if this was supposed to be the best of Superman from those decades, was the next book just not good? You know, it always left me was like, why can't I not finish the story? And again, not knowing how comic books worked at the time, I didn't really deep dive into that book to find out what books were reprinted to try to find that story. And it was one of those things where it isn't until I'm in college that I even find a copy of that same Superman book in a bookstore. Because I've only read it a few times in the library. Every time I went to the library, I would take it out and read it, but we couldn't take it out of the school. So it was one of those books that stayed in the school. So I would read it for the 20 minutes that we had that break, and then that was it. So I would, every few days, I would just read a couple of chapters in that book. And again, it was one of those things where by the time I started collecting comics, I wasn't getting Superman because it didn't look the same. It wasn't the same thing.
Right.
And it isn't until I go to high school where, you know, Crisis is a big thing. And I was just coming off the heels of Secret Wars because that was, to me, Secret Wars was my introduction into comics. Mm-hmm. So when I started going to high school, I'm learning about Crisis was kind of that equivalent, meaning all the superheroes are coming together, not knowing how many superheroes DC had, and then just trying to make sense of Crisis and what was going on, and then meeting George in a way through that type of thing.
Wow, imagine trying to make sense out of DC Comics when Crisis is your first comic.
Yeah.
That's so something.
That was my baptism by fire because we were trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And again, trying to find back issues because I hadn't discovered a true comic book shop until I went to high school. Before that, as Jared said, in junior high school, all I was getting was comics in various newsstands. I had to hit all the newsstands because not everyone carried the same books.
Right.
And then when I moved from New Rochelle to the Bronx, there was a new set of stores to find. But I did run into that where someone was selling comic books out of their basement apartment. So they had a street level apartment, and it was called JJ's. And that's where I discovered sleeves for comics. I never saw sleeves before. So I was keeping a lot of my comics in like a shoebox.
Well, you know what?
Binder.
What you said about the way you were finding the comics in New York, as a kid hearing like interviews with like Gene Simmons talking about Paul Stanley driving him around and he was paying $1 for a pound of comics and seeing little things on TV and stuff. What you just said is probably the first thing that I've been right about New York ever, seen it on TV and stuff like that. That's how I picture people getting comics and stuff.
Going into a basement apartment.
I'm serious. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember I was in junior high school when we moved to the Bronx from New Rochelle, and I was in the auditorium for whatever assembly or what have you. But there were some kids in front of me that had X-Men comic books, and I didn't see those issues before. And it's like, oh, where did you get those? And they're like, oh, at JJ's. And then they're putting them into sleeves. And again, my mind's being blown. I've never seen these. A way to protect the comic book. Where'd you get those sleeves? JJ has it. Who the fuck is JJ? And they were just saying it like it was a normal thing. And it was like a buddy of mine was like, oh, I know where JJ's is. I'll take you there. It's like, all right, cool. So I'm thinking JJ's has to be a store. You know, probably a newsstand. And it's like we go in and it's like, oh, it's literally a door against the building. So it's one of those basement, first floor apartments. And we walk in, and you can see from the door a poster. They had a Secret Wars poster, and they had a glass shelf. So you had a register, and you had all those stuff. And you walk down this step, and you come into this room, and I'm looking at the books, and then I look over, and there's a full living room. So we're really in some guy's apartment that he's selling books from. And I was like, all right, let me get it back of the sleeves. And, you know, and I bought some comics that day. But I never went back to JJ's. I did not like the vibe of walking into someone's home. It was so weird to me. And again, after that, I was just hitting my local bodegas in the area. And again, I don't discover a comic book shop until high school, because I went to the High School of Art and Design, which is on 59th Street. 2 blocks over was Forbidden Planet, and that's the first time I've been to a comic book shop, and completely different than anything I ever went to, because half of it would look like a regular bookstore, and then the rest was comics and back issues and stuff like that. And again, not knowing prices to back issues in a comic book shop, it's like, why is that X-Men book $3? It was 60 cents last month. And it always blew my mind, like, X-Men was always that price, always that high price, to me, for no reason whatsoever.
Kind of sort of about that. One of the weirdest things, I had a stepdad. He was collecting comics, and that's why they're in the house. Just long story short, there, right? But I think I was like 5 or 6. And I don't know if he was getting worried that I was getting took advantage of, or he was afraid of what I was going to do with it. I don't know where it came from, but I thought he was going to give me some like fatherly advice, which is really weird coming from this dude if you knew him. But he looks at me real stern, like out of the blue, no context, no explanation, no lead up. And he goes, all right, what you need to know is if there's trading going on, it's 2 DCs for 1 Marvel. Got it? Like, okay. And then that was it. That was the whole conversation. So apparently it was serious business, you know.
You could have that conversation today, but it would just be 3.
It's a good ratio.
Yeah.
I've never traded comics.
No?
Yeah, so I never got into that type of thing. I've only
We
traded
did.
baseball cards with my cousins. And it was like, it wasn't a true transaction because, again, wasn't collecting anything like that. And I've never tried to really do that. And the first time I ever tried to sell a comic book, I had no idea what I was doing. It was issue of Defenders. I think it was issue 3. And it was like one of those things where I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know how to protect the comics. I had it folded up in my jacket. I brought it in, I pulled it out. The guy before me sold like a stack of books. And like, oh, I don't have as many. I have this. And the look at the comic book shop guy's face. I don't know. I didn't know anything about tradition. I didn't know anything about protection. And it was like the very first time I attempted to sell a book that I understood was probably worth about $10 at that time. And again, I'm selling books. I mean, I'm buying books at 65 cents, 75 cents. So for me, seeing that he had the book hanging up for $10, it was like, oh, I have a book that's worth $10. He used to say he did not buy the book, and I still have it.
The one thing about New York that I learned was different from comics. There's not nearly as many alleys in New York City as there are in comic books. There's a lot more alleys in the comic books.
But
at least
there
in parts
are
of New York
many
I've been to.
as water towers.
Wait, There are still a lot of water towers, but you just don't see them.
Yeah, there
But
are.
there
a lot
really
of
are water towers. I've got
And
some.
Hell's Kitchen is a nicer place to live was already a nicer place to live in the 1990s.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I had a friend who lived there in the 80s, and it was already nicer than the 70s, that's for sure. And now it's all gentrified.
Mhm.
Hell's Kitchen isn't appropriate at all.
Not anymore.
I can move now. I had to move some stuff out of the way. I can.
He feels comfortable again.
Oh man. All right, guys. I am going to have to wind this down. I appreciate
Alrighty.
everybody that's popped in.
I think I'm
Breen?
all talked out anyway.
Yeah, everybody that's here. You guys, Paolo and Jared, know and stuff like that. We'll get that. Breen, I need some kind of way to contact you. I just have Instagram and Messenger and Facebook. So
Wilson's on Facebook. That's how I contact.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm not on any of those. I'm just on Twitter to get.
I'm back on
Notifications
Twitter.
for-
Okay.
Okay,
I'm
well,
back
yeah,
on-
just follow me and that.
We'll do that. We gotta get you on
I'm
here.
I'm all over social media as Ramos Comics.
He's
Okay.
got a TikTok net going now, telling old Marvel
Well,
stories.
What I do, Jared, is when you bring somebody on as one of your friends, I just get on your Facebook and look
Yeah,
for them
you can just
next
find
time I'm
them.
on. So, yeah, I just go to your friends list.
Yep.
So.
You'll find them there.
All right. So, real quick there, Jared Osborne has his own channel. He's more or less, I mean, Cabinet of Chaos is in his thing. It started on my channel because, I was COVID. I had time. Paolo's
Then
all
he
over
got
the place.
married.
Yeah, and got married. Yeah. Graphic Man has the Fossil Show, amongst other things that he does. So check that out. Breen is just the whore of YouTube all over the place. Just letting you know.
Pretty much.
And
Not inaccurate.
I'm just
Paolo's
not
on
inaccurate,
every
but-
Friday with me.
Yeah.
Wilson's
And on Wednesdays
there
on Graphic
too,
Man.
lady.
That's right.
And I love it, Eric. I mean, it's so funny. I can't get a hold of you on social media, but I can just find you on YouTube anywhere. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, Tim Lim said that one night. He goes, I'm sitting there, I'm drawing, and one of your videos pops up, and everything underneath it, he goes, you're in it.
Oh, and then I'm gonna call. I wanted to say something about this. And then, like, I'll do these things where I'll find a channel and kind of purge if I got time. I work all the time and drive and all that stuff, right? And then I'll find one of your videos you'll post, and you're like, "I'm sorry, I'm uploading a video. I know it was like everybody wanted it or something." And I'm sitting here like, "What is he doing?"
No, I said because one of them's called because no one demanded it.
Right.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, every 6 months, whether you want it or not.
There we go. And Mr. Ramos, what would you like to plug? Anything you want to plug while you're here?
I freelance for everybody, so I'm currently working with a group called Apex Comics Group. We just put out a set of books. One's called The Outer Spaceman, another one's called Phaser Universe, and the last one is called Project Right by Tom DeFalco and Ron Friends. They're currently live on Indiegogos. All the projects, the Indiegogo, the projects have finished. But if you want to order the books, you can order them still through that the way we have it set up.
I really hope people jump on there, and get the Falco and Friends. They're actually going to be at Heroes Con, which is 3 hours away from me in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I've actually been, and if I
have copies of the books there, yes.
Yeah, the gas prices the way they are, I'm going back and forth if I'm going, because it's going to be like $150 in gas if I do go. So I don't know.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And guys, I mean, I'm the baby here about what's happened to George, and I know, you know what I mean. So this has been cathartic. I want to pretend everybody was here for me, but George has a family and send them the well wishes and stuff. And this was a lot of fun, man. It was great going down. Seriously, it was great going down memory lane and thinking about everything George has brought and enriched our lives. So it was fantastic. So we'll just say bye. And
All right.
if we can get every hand waving, and that'll be the last shot. I'm gonna. Oh, wait.